It is the early morning of August 27, 1776. Long Island, New York. The moonless sky hangs heavy over the sleeping countryside. Inside a modest roadside tavern owned by the Howard family, silence is shattered by the sudden echo of boots and the metallic clatter of muskets. William Howard, a young man barely into adulthood, wakes abruptly. As his eyes adjust to the dim light of a lantern, he freezes. Standing over his bed is a British soldier, bayonet gleaming coldly in the flickering glow. Without a word, the redcoat orders him to get dressed. The grim authority in the man's tone leaves no room for hesitation. Moments later, William is marched downstairs into the tavern's main room, the same place where only days ago, travelers, farmers, and militiamen had shared drinks and whispered talk of liberty. Now, that cozy taproom is filled with red uniforms and drawn muskets. His father, William Howard Sr., stands near the bar flanked by 3 British light infantrymen. Their bayonets are fixed. 2 officers stand in the corner. One wears a heavy cloak, his face half hidden, but the elder Howard thinks he recognizes him. The moment the man speaks, there's no more guessing. His deep, commanding voice is unmistakable. It is Sir William Howe, Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces in North America. The general politely requests a drink of liquor. The senior Howard pours it with a trembling hand, but Howe isn't here for comfort. He begins asking quiet questions about the road that winds past their tavern and leads through the wooded hills to the east. The locals call it Jamaica Pass. It's a narrow trail, seldom traveled and perfect for moving unseen. Then, Howe looks squarely at Howard and tells him he will guide the British vanguard through that road before dawn. Both Howards refuse, at first. But when the soldiers raise their muskets, the elder Howard's resolve breaks. Reluctantly, father and son agree to lead the way. And so, under cover of total darkness, the column of red-coated troops begins to move down the narrow trail through Jamaica Pass, guided by 2 terrified Long Islanders. Behind them, 10,000 British soldiers silently advance toward the sleeping Continental Army, which remains unaware that by sunrise, its flank will be crushed. This is how the Battle of Long Island, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, truly begins. By the summer of 1776, hope seemed to shine brightly for the newly declared United States. After forcing the British to evacuate Boston in March, there was no major royal presence in the colonies between Georgia and Massachusetts. Patriots held control of local governments, militias, and courts. But even the most optimistic revolutionaries knew King George would never surrender his empire without a fight. And so, in July 1776, only weeks after the Declaration of Independence was signed, a massive British fleet, over 100 ships, appeared off the coast of New York. To the terrified citizens watching from the shore, it was an overwhelming sight. The largest expeditionary force Britain had ever assembled. Tens of thousands of troops, sailors, Hessian mercenaries, and war material dwarfed the ragtag Continental Army. In command of them stood Sir William Howe. Howe's orders were clear: destroy George Washington's main field army, capture New York City, and crush the rebellion before winter. Washington, meanwhile, divided his smaller army between Manhattan and Long Island. About 6,000 men farmers, merchants, and young volunteers dug defensive positions atop Brooklyn Heights and the Heights. Guam. Washington hoped the British might attempt a direct assault, like they had at Bunker Hill the previous year, where disciplined British soldiers had walked straight into American gunfire and suffered horrendous losses. But Howe was no fool. Since Bunker Hill, he had learned painful lessons. He no longer intended to march his men like toy soldiers into entrenched muskets. Instead, he planned to maneuver around the enemy, cutting them off before they could react. On the night of August 26th, with deceptive campfires still burning to fool American scouts, Howe quietly led 10,000 men out of their encampment. They marched for hours down narrow dirt paths, the soldiers forbidden to speak or light torches. The night was dense and suffocating. More than once, engineers had to halt the column to cut down trees blocking the path, sawing silently, as the sound of axes might betray their movement. When the British reached Jamaica Pass, only 5 American militiamen stood guard 5, to hold a route through which an entire army could pass. They were quickly captured without a shot. Howe's bold gamble had worked. By dawn, the British were behind the American lines. Meanwhile, farther west near Guan Heights, American pickets spotted redcoats advancing from the south. They fired upon a few British soldiers raiding a watermelon patch near the Red Lion Inn, accidentally triggering the battle prematurely. Within hours, fierce engagements broke out along hills and farm roads. The noise of musket volleys and cannon fire echoed over the ridges, drawing Washington's attention from across the East River. Convinced that this was the main British attack, he rushed reinforcements to that front, but it was a trap. Howe's flanking column was still marching through the woods to strike from behind. By mid-morning, the trap closed. Near the village of Bedford, 2 Continental Rifle regiments stumbled upon the advancing British and tried desperately to defend a patchwork of fences, fields, and orchards. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and quickly forced to retreat. Panic swept through the lines. Soldiers dropped their muskets and ran for their lives as the redcoats descended with bayonets fixed. To the west, General William Alexander, known as Lord Sterling, was still engaged in brutal fighting near the Gowanus Creek, unaware his left flank had collapsed. For hours, his Marylanders, Delawareans, and Pennsylvanians fought tenaciously against General Grant's diversionary forces, believing they were holding the main assault. Only when the sky turned gray with powder smoke did Sterling realize the rest of the army had been enveloped. In one of the most heroic moments of the war, Alexander ordered a battalion from Maryland, just 270 men, to charge the oncoming British and Hessians to buy time for others to escape. They attacked again and again, with bayonets and sheer courage, against overwhelming odds. They were eventually overrun, and Alexander captured, but their sacrifice allowed hundreds of Continentals to retreat across the swamps toward Brooklyn Heights. Of those noble soldiers, later remembered as the Maryland 400, barely a handful survived. By mid-afternoon, the battle was lost. Smoke from burning powder mingled with the haze of humidity as retreating American soldiers poured into the fortifications atop Brooklyn Heights. From there, they could see the East River glimmering in the distance, their only path of escape. Howe's army halted at the base of the hill, debating the next move. Some British officers urged an immediate storming of the heights to finish Washington once and for all, but Howe refused. He remembered the slaughter at Bunker Hill. His men had marched all night and fought all day. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and far from their supplies. A frontal assault, he believed, would turn triumph into another bloody disaster. So the British dug in and prepared for a siege. For Washington, trapped on the heights with his back to the river, the situation seemed hopeless. Yet he refused to give up. On the night of August 28th, he convened a council of war and resolved upon a daring plan: to evacuate his entire army across the East River silently, under cover of darkness. Through torrential rain and biting wind, small boats ferried regiment after regiment across the black waters to Manhattan. The operation was conducted with astonishing discipline. Not a lantern burned, not a musket clanged. Even when a miscommunication left the rear guard exposed, fate intervened. As dawn broke, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the last American boats just in time. When the mist lifted, the British found the heights deserted. Washington had vanished, his army saved once more by boldness and luck. In later years, many will call Howe's decision not to press the attack one of history's great blunders. Yet his caution was not without reason. His men were stretched thin, the enemy position formidable, and the Royal Navy unable to sail up the East River due to contrary winds. Even total victory at Brooklyn would not have ended the war. Most of the Continental Army was still stationed on Manhattan. Howe, patient and methodical, continued his campaign, repeatedly outflanking the rebels at Kips Bay and White Plains before finally capturing Fort Washington in November, a devastating blow to the Americans. Washington's army, now battered and dwindling, retreated across New Jersey into Pennsylvania, pursued at every step. Many believed the revolution was effectively over, but Washington did not. In the coldest days of winter, he struck back with a daring counterattack across the icy Delaware River, winning unexpected victories at Trenton and Princeton. These triumphs revived the cause and proved that the American spirit, the belief in liberty and self-determination, would not die so easily. And so, what began that August night in the taproom of a small tavern on Long Island, when a redcoat ordered a young man from his bed at gunpoint, became not the end of the American Revolution, but its fiery beginning, a story of despair turned defiance, and defeat transformed into the first flicker of freedom.